Long before humanity built monuments meant to last forever, before kings believed their names could outlive the desert winds, people were already afraid of being forgotten. It is easy to imagine ancient history as loud, armies marching, temples rising, crowds cheering beneath marble columns. But the oldest surviving words from our ancestors are not triumphant. They are cautious, sometimes anxious, and occasionally threatening. In a quiet museum room somewhere in the modern world, you might find a small piece of clay no larger than your hand. Its surface is marked with tiny wedge-shaped symbols, the earliest writing system known to us. At first glance, it looks ordinary, just another fragment of a civilization long gone. But then you read the final line carved into the tablet, a warning, a promise of punishment, a sentence written not for the present, but for strangers thousands of years in the future. Whoever alters these words, may the gods erase his name. And suddenly, the distance between ancient and modern feels smaller, because beneath the dust of history, the emotion is familiar. Humans have always wanted their stories to survive, and when they feared losing control, they turned to the oldest form of protection they knew. They cursed. The world before curses had names. To understand why curses appeared so early in human writing, we need to imagine a world that felt unstable. Ancient cities were fragile. A single flood could destroy an entire harvest. A sudden illness could wipe out a family line. There were no scientific explanations, no reliable forecasts, no safety nets. When something went wrong, it was not seen as random, it was personal. Someone must have angered the gods. Someone must have crossed an invisible line. In this atmosphere of uncertainty, language became more than communication. Words were believed to carry weight, almost like tools that could shape reality itself. A blessing invited protection, a curse invited destruction. And once writing appeared, those spoken fears gained permanence. They could now survive beyond the voice that created them. Part 1. Mesopotamia, where words became weapons first. The sun rises slowly over the plains of ancient Mesopotamia. Mud brick cities stretch toward the horizon, their walls glowing gold in early light. Merchants move through narrow streets carrying baskets of grain. Priests climb temple stairs to greet the day's first rituals. Somewhere inside a small room near the temple complex, a scribe presses a reed stylus into soft clay. Each mark is deliberate, each symbol carefully aligned. Writing at this moment in history is still rare, a skill possessed by only a few. And yet, even in these earliest days, writing carries an unexpected edge, because the scribe is not only recording trade, he's recording fear. The Kudaru stones, borders guarded by gods. Among the most fascinating objects from Mesopotamia are boundary stones known as kudaru. These were not merely markers of land ownership, they were sacred declarations. Imagine standing before one, a tall stone carved with images of divine symbols, crescent moons, stars, horned crowns, each representing a powerful god. Below these symbols runs a block of text. It describes the land grant, the king's authority, the legal agreement, and finally, the curse. If any man removes this stone, if he changes the words written here, may the great gods bring famine to his fields, may his lineage vanish like smoke. The language is poetic, almost rhythmic, and it reveals a profound truth about early civilization. Law and religion were inseparable. There were no courts to enforce property rights across vast distances, but a curse backed by divine names, that traveled far beyond the reach of soldiers. Writing against oblivion. Some of the most moving Mesopotamian curses are not grand royal threats, but quiet lines added by scribes themselves. At the end of long tablets, you sometimes find a single sentence: "Whoever erases my writing, may his wisdom turn to dust." It feels personal, not political, a human voice reaching across millennia, asking for respect. We often think of ancient writers as distant figures, but moments like this remind us how familiar they were. They worried about plagiarism, about edits, about someone misrepresenting their work, and so they turned to the only protection they trusted: the gods. The gods as witnesses. Mesopotamian curses often list long sequences of deities: Enlil, lord of wind and authority; Shamash, the god of justice; Ishtar, fierce and unpredictable. Each god is assigned a role in the punishment. One brings drought, another illness, another confusion of the mind. By naming multiple gods, the writer creates a network of watchers, divine witnesses ensuring the words cannot be ignored. It's less a magical spell and more a cosmic contract, and it worked not because the punishment was certain, but because belief made it feel inevitable. A city at night. As evening falls over an ancient Mesopotamian city, torches flicker along temple walls. The streets grow quiet. Somewhere beneath the floor of a house lies a clay tablet sealed away centuries ago. Its curse was never activated. No one broke the boundary. No one altered the text. And yet the warning survived, waiting for modern archaeologists to read it. A message written for people who did not yet exist. Transition. From land to eternity. Mesopotamian curses protected land and legacy, but along the Nile River, another civilization would shape the idea of curses in a completely different way. Here, the greatest fear was not losing property, it was losing eternity, and so the language of punishment shifted, becoming quieter, more spiritual, and deeply tied to the journey after death. In the next part of our journey, we step into ancient Egypt, where silence itself became a warning. The river that promised forever. If Mesopotamia was a land shaped by uncertainty, Egypt felt, at least on the surface, eternal. The Nile River rose and fell in predictable rhythms. Fields turned green after the floods. Stone temples stood unmoved for generations. To outsiders, Egypt may have appeared stable, almost timeless. But beneath that sense of order lived a quiet fear, not of death itself, but of what might happen after it. For the ancient Egyptians, dying was not the end of existence. It was a transition, a passage into a second life that depended on memory, ritual, and preservation. And that is where curses began to change. In Mesopotamia, curses guarded land. In Egypt, they guarded identity. The tomb as a machine of immortality. Step into an Egyptian tomb, not as a modern visitor with electric light, but as someone standing in the dim glow of oil lamps thousands of years ago. The walls are covered with painted figures, scenes of farming, feasting, music, and prayer. Every image serves a purpose, nothing is decoration. The tomb is a blueprint for eternity. Egyptians believed the soul required three things to survive beyond death: the preserved body, the spoken name, and a protected resting place. If any of these were disturbed, the journey into the afterlife could fail. And so tomb inscriptions began including warnings, not loud threats carved in anger, but carefully phrased reminders that the dead were still under divine protection. A different kind of curse. Egyptian curse texts rarely sounded violent. They did not always promise immediate death or disaster. Instead, they described cosmic imbalance. One inscription from an old kingdom tomb warns, "As for anyone who shall do evil against this tomb, the great God shall judge him." There is a calmness in the language, a confidence that justice will come naturally. The Egyptians did not need to shout. They believed the universe itself would respond. This difference reveals something important about Egyptian culture. Where Mesopotamian curses invoked chaos, famine, disease, madness, Egyptian ones invoked order. The idea of Ma'at, cosmic balance, guided their worldview. A curse was not simply revenge, it was a restoration of harmony. Why tomb robbers were so feared? Despite elaborate rituals, tomb robbery was common. Gold, jewelry, and sacred objects tempted thieves across centuries. Priests knew that warnings alone could not stop every intruder, but inscriptions served another purpose: psychological defense. Imagine entering a narrow burial chamber, the air heavy with dust, your torchlight flickering across painted gods watching silently from the walls, and then you read a line promising divine judgment. Even a hardened thief might hesitate. Fear is powerful when it feels unseen. The Watchers of the Afterlife. Egyptian tombs often featured images of protective deities, jackal-headed guardians, serpent figures, or winged goddesses. These were not simply artistic choices. They reinforced the idea that the tomb was alive with spiritual presence. Some inscriptions addressed these beings directly. "O you who guard this place, strike down anyone who comes with evil intent." Unlike Mesopotamian curses, which relied heavily on written threats, Egyptian tombs combined text, imagery, and ritual into a single protective system. The curse was part of an environment, a sacred atmosphere designed to make intrusion feel dangerous even if nothing happened physically. The quiet power of names. One of the most feared punishments in Egypt was not death, but erasure. To remove someone's name from history was to destroy their existence in the afterlife. Some curse formulas hinted at the ultimate consequence: they shall not be remembered. This idea feels strangely modern. Even today, people fear being forgotten more than being judged. The Egyptians understood memory as a form of immortality, and curses became tools to defend it. The Pharaoh's Curse, a modern obsession. Thousands of years later, when archaeologists opened royal tombs, the world rediscovered Egyptian curses. Newspapers loved the idea. Headlines spoke of mysterious deaths and supernatural revenge. The opening of Tutankhamun's tomb in the early 20th century became the center of this fascination. Several individuals connected to the excavation died in the years that followed. To modern audiences, it seemed proof that ancient warnings still held power. But historians tend to view the Pharaoh's curse differently. Many deaths were unrelated, separated by long periods of time. What truly spread was not magic, but narrative. Humans love patterns. We connect events even when coincidence explains them. In a way, the real curse was psychological. Once people believed in it, every misfortune felt meaningful. Night in the necropolis. Imagine the desert at night, wind moving slowly across the sand. Hidden beneath the dunes are thousands of tombs, some grand, others modest, each carrying inscriptions meant to last forever. Most curses were never tested. No thief came, no vandal changed the text, and yet the warnings remain. They continue to speak to us today, long after the priests who carved them disappeared. The role of priests and magic. Egyptian priests were not only religious leaders, they were guardians of sacred knowledge. They understood the power of spoken and written words. Some texts combined protective blessings with subtle threats, creating a balance between invitation and warning. This duality reflects the Egyptian worldview. The universe was not divided into pure good and evil. Instead, it required constant maintenance. Curses were part of that maintenance, tools that helped preserve order. A slow shift in human thinking. As we move forward in time, something begins to change. In Mesopotamia, curses protected property. In Egypt, they protected eternity. But in the classical Mediterranean world, curses would become intensely personal, no longer carved only by kings or priests, but written by ordinary people seeking justice in their own lives. And with that shift, curses would take on a new emotional depth, revealing jealousy, longing, and desperation in ways ancient monuments never could. In the next part of our journey, we traveled to Greece and Rome, where curses leave the walls of temples and enter the hands of everyday citizens. Greece and Rome, when curses became personal. A different kind of silence. If you walk through the ruins of an ancient Greek or Roman city today, you might imagine philosophers debating beneath marble columns or crowds cheering in vast arenas. But beneath those stones, buried in wells, graves, and forgotten corners, archaeologists have discovered something far more intimate: small sheets of lead, thin, folded, and often pierced with nails. At first glance, they appear insignificant, yet when unfolded, they reveal handwritten messages filled with emotion. Not royal decrees, not sacred laws, but private curses. And suddenly, the ancient world feels closer, almost uncomfortably human. The birth of the deficciones. Historians call these objects deficciones, a Latin word meaning binding spells. Unlike earlier curses created by kings or priests, these were written by ordinary individuals: a jealous lover, a struggling merchant, a competitor in a race. People who lived ordinary lives but faced extraordinary frustrations. Imagine a young man standing outside a temple at dusk. He carries a thin lead sheet and a stylus. He does not shout his anger. Instead, he writes slowly, "Bind the tongue of my rival. Let him forget his words when he stands before the judge." He folds the tablet, drives a small nail through it, and drops it into a dark well, a place believed to connect the living world to the underworld. The act is quiet, almost secretive, and deeply emotional. Why lead? Lead was not chosen by accident. It was heavy, cold, and associated with the underworld. Its dull surface seemed fitting for messages meant to travel into darkness. Writing on lead also required effort. The stylus scratched into the metal, leaving uneven lines that feel raw and immediate. Unlike carved stone inscriptions, these tablets preserve hesitation, misspellings, corrections, uneven spacing. They feel personal. You can almost imagine the writer pausing between words, unsure whether the gods would listen. Curses of love and jealousy. Many Greek and Roman curse tablets focus on relationships. Love in the ancient world was not always romantic in the modern sense. It was often tied to status, alliances, and competition. Some tablets ask the gods to make a desired person restless until they return affection. Others attempt to separate rivals. One surviving text reads almost like a desperate confession. "Let her sleep only when she thinks of me. Let her heart burn until she comes to my door." It is easy to dismiss these words as superstition, but they reveal something universal: the pain of rejection, the longing for control in matters of the heart. The curse becomes a substitute for confrontation. Instead of speaking directly to the person they love, the writer speaks to invisible forces. Courtroom curses. Legal disputes were common in Greek and Roman cities. Public trials determined reputation, wealth, and sometimes survival. Not everyone trusted fairness. Some individuals turned to curse tablets to influence outcomes. A tablet discovered near Athens asks the spirits to silence an opponent during a trial. Let his memory fail him. Let confusion cover his mind. The writer does not attack physically. Instead, they attempt to reshape reality through language. It feels surprisingly modern, like hoping for good luck before an important presentation, except framed in the language of divine intervention. Curses in the arena. One of the most fascinating categories of Roman curse tablets comes from racing arenas. Chariot racing was wildly popular and incredibly competitive. Fans were fiercely loyal to their teams. Some tablets call upon underworld spirits to weaken specific horses or drivers. Archaeologists found dozens buried near racetracks, each targeting a different competitor. The writers were not kings or priests, they were spectators, ordinary people who believed their words might influence the outcome of a race. It reveals how deeply magic had entered everyday life. The boundary between entertainment and spirituality blurred. The ritual of binding. Writing the curse was only part of the process. The physical treatment of the tablet mattered as much. Many were folded tightly, sometimes multiple times, as if sealing the intention. Others were pierced with nails. Historians believe this act symbolized binding the target's fate. The tablet itself became a representation of the person being cursed. By controlling the object, the writer believed they could control the outcome. This ritual aspect shows how curses combined writing, symbolism, and emotion into a single act. Voices from the underworld. Where were these tablets placed? Often in liminal spaces, areas believed to connect worlds, graves, wells, sanctuaries dedicated to chthonic deities. The choice of location mattered. Dropping a tablet into darkness symbolized sending a message to forces beneath the earth. It's a haunting image. Hundreds of silent voices hidden below the city, waiting for divine attention. A city filled with unseen stories. When we imagine ancient Rome, we picture grand architecture and political drama, but curse tablets remind us that beneath the surface lived countless private struggles: jealousy between neighbors, fear of losing a lawsuit, desperation for love. Each tablet is a fragment of a life, a moment when someone felt powerless and turned to magic for relief. Unlike monumental inscriptions meant to impress the public, these texts were never meant to be seen again. They were messages sent into secrecy, and perhaps that's why they feel so honest. Were people afraid of being cursed? Interestingly, some tablets include protective language, attempts to defend against curses from others. This suggests a cultural environment where people believed invisible conflicts surrounded them. A rival might secretly write your name onto a tablet. A stranger might ask the gods to weaken your success. Whether or not these beliefs had real effects, they shaped behavior. Curses created an emotional landscape where invisible forces felt present everywhere. The shift from power to emotion. By this point in history, curses had undergone a profound transformation. In Mesopotamia, they enforced law. In Egypt, they protected eternity. In Greece and Rome, they became expressions of personal struggle. They reveal a world where ordinary people sought agency in uncertain circumstances. The divine was no longer distant. It was intimate, accessible, even negotiable. Transition. Back to kings. But while everyday citizens wrote private curses, rulers across Anatolia and the Near East continued using maledictions as instruments of power. In the next part of our journey, we return to monumental inscriptions, where curses once again served empires, shaping loyalty through fear and divine authority. And in doing so, we begin to see how curses were not just emotional outlets, but political tools designed to control entire societies. Anatolia and the Near East. Curses as tools of power, where empires met the gods. As we leave the crowded streets of Greece and Rome behind, the landscape begins to change. Mountains rise from dry plains. Wind moves across open valleys. Stone cities stand watch over ancient trade routes connecting east and west. This is Anatolia and the greater Near East, a region where empires grew not only through military strength, but through something quieter, language shaped by divine authority. Here, curses returned to the world of kings, but they were no longer just warnings. They became instruments of political control. The Hittites, words carved in stone. The Hittite Empire, which flourished in the 2nd millennium BCE, left behind some of the most striking examples of royal maledictions. Their inscriptions often recorded treaties, laws, and construction projects. At first glance, these texts appear purely administrative, but near the end of many inscriptions comes a shift in tone. The language slows, the phrasing becomes deliberate, and then the curse begins. If anyone alters these words, if he destroys this monument, may the storm god scatter his people and turn his land into dust. These lines were not emotional outbursts, they were carefully structured conclusions, almost ritualistic in their placement. Every inscription ended with a reminder: the king's authority was protected not only by soldiers, but by divine forces. Why royal curses worked. To modern readers, such threats may seem symbolic, but in the ancient world, belief made them powerful. Imagine living in a society where natural disasters were interpreted as messages from the gods. If a drought followed an act of disobedience, it would not feel like coincidence, it would feel like proof. Royal curses transformed political loyalty into a sacred duty. Breaking a treaty was no longer just a legal violation, it was a cosmic offense. Treaties written with fear. Some of the most fascinating Hittite texts are diplomatic treaties. Agreements between rulers were sealed with long lists of blessings and curses. The blessings promised prosperity if the treaty was honored. The curses described devastating consequences if it was broken. May the gods of heaven and earth destroy his house. May his descendants wander without land. These lines served a psychological purpose. They ensured that even distant rulers felt watched, because while armies might not reach across vast territories quickly, fear of divine punishment traveled instantly. The gods as political allies. In Mesopotamia, curses invoked gods as witnesses. In Anatolia and the Near East, rulers went further, presenting themselves as chosen or protected by those gods. The king became more than a political leader, he became a sacred figure whose authority reflected cosmic order. To oppose the king was to disrupt harmony itself. This merging of religion and politics created a powerful narrative. The empire did not merely exist, it was meant to exist, and curses reinforced that idea at every level. Urartu and the language of destruction. Centuries later, the kingdom of Urartu continued this tradition. Stone inscriptions carved into mountain fortresses often ended with vivid maledictions. If anyone destroys this writing, may the great god erase his name and his seed. The phrase "erase his name" appears again, echoing Egyptian fears of oblivion. Across cultures, the ultimate punishment remained the same: to be forgotten. Propaganda disguised as divine justice. Modern historians often describe these royal curses as early propaganda, but unlike modern political messaging, they were framed as spiritual truth. People did not see them as manipulation, they saw them as reality. When a monument declared divine punishment for rebellion, it shaped how people understood power. It discouraged resistance not just through force, but through belief. The inscription itself became a silent guardian. A monument speaks. Imagine standing before a massive stone stele under the open sky. The surface is covered with tightly carved symbols. You trace the lines with your eyes, reading of victories, alliances, and divine favor, and then you reach the final lines, the curse. It is not loud, not angry, it feels inevitable, like the closing of a circle. The monument does not shout, it simply warns, and that quiet certainty may have been more powerful than any threat of violence. The human side of royal power. It is easy to view kings as distant figures, but their use of curses reveals a deeper anxiety. Empires were fragile, borders shifted, alliances broke. A ruler could never fully control how future generations would treat his legacy. Carving a curse into stone was a way of reaching forward through time, asking strangers to respect what had been built. In that sense, royal curses were not only tools of control, they were acts of hope, a belief that words might outlast chaos. The sound of silence. Centuries pass, empires fall, cities fade into ruins, yet the inscriptions remain. Even when languages are forgotten, the physical presence of the text continues to communicate something powerful, a warning meant to survive beyond the lifetime of the person who wrote it. And perhaps that's the true strength of ancient curses. They were not spoken in anger and then lost. They were carved into permanence. Transition from empires to inner worlds. By now, we have seen curses used in many ways: to protect land in Mesopotamia, to guard eternity in Egypt, to express emotion in Greece and Rome, to enforce authority in Anatolia and the Near East. But one final question remains. Why did so many different cultures, separated by distance and language, arrive at similar ideas? What does the existence of curses reveal about the human mind itself? In the next part of our journey, we step away from individual civilizations and look inward, exploring the psychology behind humanity's oldest written fears. Why humans created curses. The need to control the invisible. Across deserts, rivers, temples, and cities, one pattern quietly repeats. Different languages, different gods, different empires, yet everywhere we look, humans wrote curses. This raises a simple but powerful question: why? Not why specific cultures believed in divine punishment, but why the idea itself appears again and again throughout history. To understand this, we have to step away from monuments and artifacts for a moment and step inside the ancient human mind. Imagine living in a world without scientific explanation. Storms arrive without warning, illness spreads silently, a strong ruler dies suddenly. Nothing feels predictable. When events seem random, the human brain searches for meaning. And when meaning cannot be found, it is created. Curses were one way ancient societies turned chaos into something understandable. Instead of saying, "bad things happen," they could say, "someone broke a rule," and rules are comforting. Language as power. Today, we think of words as communication, but in ancient cultures, words were believed to carry substance. A spoken blessing could invite protection. A written curse could create danger. This belief did not come from superstition alone, it came from observation. When a king declared a law, people obeyed. When a priest recited a ritual, communities changed their behavior. Words shaped reality. So it was not a great leap to imagine that words could influence unseen forces as well. Writing made those words permanent, and permanence created authority. The fear of powerlessness. Many curse tablets, especially from Greece and Rome, reveal a feeling that still exists today, the fear of having no control. A person loses a court case, a lover chooses someone else, a rival succeeds unfairly. When direct action feels impossible, people look for indirect solutions. Ancient individuals turned to curses. Modern individuals might turn to wishes, affirmations, or quiet hopes for karma. The emotional core is the same, a desire to rebalance a world that feels unfair. Curses as early legal systems. Before organized legal systems became widespread, curses filled a gap. They acted as invisible enforcement. If a boundary stone warned that divine punishment awaited anyone who moved it, fewer people would risk doing so. The curse functioned like a sign that read, "You are being watched," even if no one stood nearby. This psychological effect is powerful. Humans behave differently when they believe consequences exist beyond immediate observation. Ancient societies understood this instinctively. The social life of fear. Curses also shaped communities. When people believed that hidden forces responded to wrongdoing, it encouraged cooperation. And dishonest action might bring misfortune not only to the individual, but to their entire family. This idea reinforced social bonds. No one wanted to be responsible for inviting divine anger into their village. In this way, curses helped maintain order without constant physical enforcement. The ritual of release. Writing a curse was often a private act, a person alone with their thoughts, scratching words into clay or metal, folding the tablet, placing it somewhere hidden. The ritual itself may have provided emotional relief. Instead of holding anger internally, the writer externalized it. They handed responsibility to the gods. Psychologically, this resembles modern practices like journaling or symbolic closure. The act of expression transforms the feeling. Even if nothing changes externally, the writer feels heard. Why forgetting was the ultimate punishment. Across Mesopotamia, Egypt, Anatolia, and Rome, one threat appears again and again: erasure of the name. To modern readers, this might seem abstract, but in ancient cultures, memory was existence. If no one spoke your name, your story ended. Curses promising oblivion struck at the deepest human fear, not death, but insignificance. This reveals something timeless. Humans do not only want to live, they want to be remembered. The line between magic and belief. From a modern perspective, it is easy to separate religion, psychology, and superstition. But for ancient people, they drew no boundaries. For them, curses were practical. They were as real as treaties or rituals. And because belief shapes behavior, the effects were tangible. A person who believed they were cursed might act differently. A ruler who believed divine protection surrounded his monument might govern with greater confidence. In this sense, curses created real outcomes, even if their supernatural claims remain unproven. Curses and storytelling. Another reason curses survived is narrative power. Humans remember stories filled with danger and consequence. A monument that ends with a warning feels dramatic.
A tomb inscription promising divine judgment captures imagination. Even today, stories of ancient curses fascinate us because they blend history with mystery. They remind us that the past was not only logical, it was also emotional, symbolic, and deeply human. The universal pattern. When we compare cultures separated by vast distances, a pattern emerges. People use curses when they feel vulnerable, when authority needs reinforcement, when love feels uncertain, when justice feels fragile. The details change, gods, languages, rituals, but the emotional foundation remains constant. Curses are not only historical artifacts, they are mirrors reflecting how humans respond to uncertainty. A quiet shift through time. As centuries passed, belief in written curses slowly transformed. New religions reshaped spiritual language. Legal systems became more structured. Science began to explain events once attributed to divine anger. Yet the underlying idea never disappeared. Even today, phrases like "what goes around comes around" echo ancient thinking. The language changes, the instinct remains. Transition, the last echoes. We have traveled through empires and temples, through private confessions and royal proclamations. Now, as our journey nears its final stage, we step into a reflective space. What remains of these ancient words today? Do curses still exist in modern culture, perhaps in forms we no longer recognize as such? In the next part, we explore the legacy of ancient maledictions and how the oldest fears written by humanity continue to shape the stories we tell ourselves.
The last echoes of ancient words. When curses stopped being called curses. If we step away from the ancient world for a moment and look at our own time, something interesting begins to appear. We rarely speak about curses as historical civilizations once did. Few people today carve warnings into stone or bury metal tablets beneath the earth. And yet, the language of unseen consequence has never truly disappeared. It simply changed its form. Where ancient people invoked the wrath of specific gods, modern cultures speak of fate, energy, karma, or destiny. The vocabulary evolved, but the emotional structure remained remarkably similar. A belief that actions carry invisible weight, a quiet expectation that imbalance will eventually correct itself. In many ways, the ancient curse did not vanish, it adapted. The afterlife of fear. For thousands of years, humans used curses to express anxieties about justice and control. As societies became more complex, organized legal systems replaced many of the practical functions curses once served. Courts replaced divine witnesses. Written law replaced sacred threats. But emotional needs do not disappear simply because institutions change. The feeling of wanting the universe to respond to unfairness still exists, and so new cultural expressions emerged. Some traditions developed ideas of cosmic balance, others emphasized moral consequence. Even in secular societies, phrases like "it will come back to them" echo ancient thinking. It is a softer language, less dramatic than invoking a storm god, but the underlying instinct feels familiar. Stories that refuse to fade. Modern fascination with ancient curses reveals something deeper than historical curiosity. When archaeologists discover a tomb or inscription containing a warning, the story spreads quickly. Media headlines focus on mystery. Audiences become captivated. Why? Because curses sit at the intersection of two powerful human impulses: the desire to understand history and the desire to believe that unseen forces still exist. Even people who approach ancient curses skeptically often feel a quiet thrill when hearing about them. It is not necessarily belief, it is the atmosphere, the sense that the past holds secrets just beyond explanation. The Pharaoh's Curse Revisited. The discovery of royal Egyptian tombs in the 20th century transformed ancient maledictions into global legends. Stories of misfortune following excavations captured public imagination. Whether those events were coincidences or not mattered less than how they were interpreted. The narrative itself became powerful. People wanted to believe that ancient words still held meaning. This tells us something about human psychology. We are drawn to the idea that history is alive, that actions taken long ago can ripple forward into the present. Curses offer a dramatic way to express that connection. Modern rituals without the name. Even without formal curse tablets, modern life contains rituals that mirror ancient practices. A person writes down thoughts they cannot express aloud. They release anger through symbolic acts, tearing paper, burning letters, speaking to an empty room. These behaviors may not be framed as magic, but they serve a similar emotional purpose. They allow individuals to transfer internal tension into an external form. The ancient writer who buried a lead tablet and the modern person who journals in private share something essential, a desire to transform feeling into action. The language of consequence. Across cultures today, people use expressions that resemble ancient maledictions, though softened by time. Everything has a price. What you send out returns to you. Energy finds its way back. These phrases lack the vivid imagery of early curses, yet they preserve the idea that the universe responds to human behavior. It is as if the ancient fear of divine punishment evolved into a broader belief in moral balance. The storm gods may no longer be named, but the expectation of consequence remains. Stories in literature and film. Modern storytelling continues to revisit the theme of curses because it offers a powerful narrative structure. A curse creates tension. It introduces uncertainty. It allows stories to explore themes of fate and redemption. From Gothic novels to contemporary cinema, cursed objects and haunted legacies remain popular motifs. Why do these stories endure? Because they externalize inner conflict. A curse becomes a metaphor for guilt, memory, or unresolved history. It allows audiences to explore fear safely within the boundaries of fiction. The human need for meaning. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of ancient curses is not the specific words carved into tablets, but the human impulse that created them. People seek patterns. When life feels unpredictable, we look for explanations that restore a sense of order. Ancient societies expressed this through divine maledictions. Modern societies express it through philosophy, psychology, or storytelling. Different language, same instinct. Memory as immortality. Across every civilization we have explored, one theme returns again and again: the fear of being forgotten. Ancient curses often threaten to erase a person's name. Today, we preserve memory through archives, photographs, and digital records. The technology changed, but the motivation did not. We still want our stories to last. We still hope our words will be heard long after we are gone. In that sense, every historical documentary, including the one you are creating, becomes part of this long chain of remembrance. You are not only telling a story about ancient curses, you are continuing the tradition of giving voice to those who feared silence. The quiet presence of the past. Imagine walking through a museum late at night, glass cases reflecting soft light,
ancient tablets resting quietly, their surfaces marked with lines written by hands long turned to dust. No storms rage, no divine punishment arrives, and yet the words still carry weight, because they remind us that history is not just a sequence of events, it is a record of emotions, fear, hope, longing for control. Curses survive not because they were supernatural, but because they were human. A world without curses, or is it? It might be tempting to believe that humanity has moved beyond the need for curses, that modern knowledge replaced ancient fears. But perhaps the truth is more subtle. We no longer carve threats into stone, yet we still use language to express invisible consequences. We warn, we predict, we imagine futures shaped by present actions. The ancient curse has transformed into a quiet philosophical idea that nothing exists in isolation, that every action echoes outward in ways we may never fully see. Transition toward a final reflection. Our journey through history has moved from clay tablets to royal monuments, from private confessions to cultural memory. In the final part of this extended narration, we step into a slow, reflective closing, bringing together the themes that connect these civilizations across thousands of years, not as a dramatic conclusion, but as a quiet meditation on why ancient words still resonate today.
What ancient curses were, and what they were not. When we look back at the oldest curses ever written, it becomes clear that they were never just about fear. They were systems, tools created by societies trying to understand a world that felt unpredictable. In Mesopotamia, curses protected borders and agreements. In Egypt, they guarded memory and the promise of an afterlife. In Greece and Rome, they became intensely personal, expressions of rivalry, longing, and frustration. And across Anatolia and the Near East, rulers used them to reinforce authority in ways that blended politics and religion into a single narrative. Each culture shaped the idea differently, but the intention remained familiar. People wanted their words to matter. The real power behind the words. Modern audiences sometimes imagine ancient curses as mysterious forces waiting to be unleashed. But when historians read these texts carefully, something quieter emerges. Most curses were not dramatic spells. They were reminders. Reminders that actions had consequences. Reminders that society depended on shared belief. A boundary stone did not stop someone because of magic alone. It stopped them because everyone agreed the warning meant something. In that sense, the real power of ancient curses came from community, from collective understanding, rather than supernatural certainty. Were people truly afraid? The answer is complicated. Some individuals likely believed deeply in divine punishment. Others may have followed tradition without strong personal conviction. Just as today, belief existed on a spectrum. What mattered most was that the language of curses created an atmosphere. It shaped behavior. It made the invisible feel present. And even when people doubted, they often chose caution, because uncertainty itself can be powerful. The shift from monuments to memory. Over time, the role of curses changed. As legal systems became more structured and religious traditions evolved, written maledictions became less central to daily life. They did not disappear completely. Instead, they transformed. What once existed as a warning carved into stone became a story passed through generations, a cultural memory rather than an active ritual. And through archaeology, those memories returned to the modern world, not as threats, but as historical voices. what these texts reveal about human nature. Perhaps the most important lesson ancient curses offer is not about gods or punishment. It is about humanity's relationship with uncertainty. When people felt powerless, they turned to language. When they feared being forgotten, they carved their names into permanence. When they wanted justice beyond human reach, they imagined unseen forces listening. These responses are not limited to the past. They reflect instincts that still shape how people think today. Listening without judgment. It is easy to look at ancient curses from a modern perspective and see them as superstition, but doing so risks missing something deeper. These texts were written by individuals navigating complex societies. They reveal creativity, vulnerability, and a desire to make sense of a world that often felt overwhelming. By listening to them without judgment, we begin to understand not only ancient civilizations, but ourselves, because the questions they asked about justice, memory, and consequence have never truly disappeared. The last words left in stone. Across deserts, rivers, and forgotten cities, countless curses still exist. Some remain buried beneath layers of earth. Others rest quietly in museum collections, translated into languages their creators could never imagine. They no longer barred kingdoms or tombs, yet they continue to speak. Not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily, reminding us that history is not only made of victories and empires, but of small human moments preserved through writing. A quiet ending. Long before modern laws or scientific explanations, people wrote curses as a way of understanding their place in the world. They believed words could protect, warn, or reshape reality. Today, we read those same words differently, not as commands, but as reflections. They show us how deeply humans have always cared about legacy, about fairness, about being remembered. And perhaps that is the true legacy of ancient curses, not fear, but connection. A reminder that even the oldest warnings were, at their core, attempts to speak to the future. And in listening now, thousands of years later, we complete the conversation they began.